She said my long hours pushed her to cheat, and it was my fault. Not an apology, not even guilt, just attribution. She delivered it the way someone might explain why they missed a meeting or forgot to buy milk. Matter of fact, clinical, as if the logic was so obvious that disagreement would be unreasonable. I did not interrupt her. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand details or ask questions that would only feed the narrative she had already constructed. I just looked at her and nodded. Then I said two words that changed the trajectory of the next 24 hours in ways she did not see coming. You're right. When I said those words, Lena smiled. Not relief, satisfaction. The kind that comes when someone thinks they have finally won an argument that has been running in their head for months. She had no idea that while she sat on the couch scrolling her phone, probably texting the same person she blamed me for.
My name is Mark, and I am 34 years old. I work in commercial operations management for a regional logistics company just outside Denver, where the mountains cut sharp lines against the sky before most people open their eyes. My life operates on structure, not impulse. My days start before sunrise and end well after dark. I live according to work weeks, deadlines, and long-range planning, not chaos or spontaneity. This is not a complaint. It is simply the architecture of how I have built my world. Some people chase experiences. I chase outcomes. For a little over 3 years, my girlfriend was Lena. She was 29, energetic in ways I never was, and drawn to spontaneity in ways that initially balanced my rigidity. We did not live together full-time, which seemed practical at the beginning, but our lives were thoroughly merged on paper. We shared keys, responsibilities, routines, and financial burdens. We occupied the same space often enough that the distinction between her apartment and mine blurred into irrelevance. People who knew us assumed we were married. The truth was more complicated. People always ask why I work so much, as if the answer is not obvious. The honest truth is simple. I was building something specific and measurable. I was promoted twice in 5 years, a trajectory that does not happen by accident in an industry where competence is common and excellence is rare. I managed teams, budgets, and contracts that generated revenue large enough to fund lifestyles most people only see in aspirational posts. I oversaw logistics operations that kept entire supply chains functioning across 3 states. I did not work late because I wanted to escape Lena or avoid intimacy. I worked late because the future does not build itself, and I refuse to be someone who talks about ambition without demonstrating it. At the beginning, she loved that about me. She bragged about it to her friends, sometimes in front of me, sometimes in texts I would see later. Ambitious, driven, stable. Those were her words. She told people she felt safe with me, that I was different from the men she had dated before, men who talked about plans but never executed them. She liked that I planned trips months ahead, that I researched hotels and booked flights and created itineraries that maximized every dollar. She liked that when something broke, I replaced it instead of talking about fixing it for weeks. She liked the results of my discipline without ever questioning the cost. Over time, that admiration curdled into something else. The compliments became criticisms. The same traits she had celebrated became flaws she needed me to fix. Little comments at first, almost playful, about me never being around enough, about how I always chose work over fun. Then the comments sharpened. She started framing my schedule as a personal deficiency instead of a shared investment in our future. Every disagreement, no matter how small, circled back to the same accusation. You care more about work than me. I corrected her the first time, calmly, explaining that caring about work and caring about her were not mutually exclusive. I corrected her the second time, with slightly more frustration, pointing out that the apartment she loved and the car she drove and the vacations she posted about were all funded by the hours she resented. After that, I stopped engaging in the circular argument. I adjusted where I could. I cut a few late nights, I took more days off, I rearranged meetings to be home for dinners that she would later claim I ruined by checking my phone. But the complaints did not soften, they intensified. It became clear that she did not want balance, she wanted leverage. The night everything cracked did not start dramatic. It was a Wednesday, ordinary in every measurable way. I came home later than planned, which was not unusual, but Lena was already irritated when I walked through the door. Arms crossed, tone clipped, the kind of posture that signals a conversation has already been decided before you arrive. She told me she had been thinking a lot and had realized something important about herself. That phrasing should have been my first warning. When someone frames betrayal as self-discovery, they have already absolved themselves of responsibility. That was when she said it, calmly, like a conclusion she had already reached without me. She said my long hours pushed her to cheat and it was my fault. Not an apology, not even guilt, just attribution. She delivered it the way someone might explain why they missed a meeting or forgot to buy milk. Matter of fact, clinical, as if the logic was so obvious that disagreement would be unreasonable. I did not interrupt her. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand details or ask questions that would only feed the narrative she had already constructed. I just looked at her and nodded. Then I said 2 words that changed the trajectory of the next 24 hours in ways she did not see coming. You're right. When I said those words, Lena smiled. Not relief, satisfaction. The kind that comes when someone thinks they have finally won an argument that has been running in their head for months. She relaxed instantly, like the conversation was over and the verdict had gone her way. She started explaining herself again, but louder now, more confident. She told me she felt neglected, that she deserved attention, that any woman would have done the same thing in her position. She framed the cheating like a weather event, unfortunate, unavoidable, basically my fault for leaving the window open. I let her talk. I did not defend myself. I did not correct the story she was telling. I did not ask who it was or how long it had been going on. Those details did not matter anymore. That seemed to confuse her at first. She kept checking my face, waiting for anger or begging or panic. None came. I agreed with her again. I said if my time and effort were the problem, then removing them made sense. That was when she laughed. Actually laughed. She said I was finally being mature about it, that maybe this could make us stronger if I learned my lesson. She misunderstood the direction of the conversation entirely. She thought my agreement meant submission. She thought I was accepting fault and preparing to change. She thought the structure of our relationship would remain intact while I apologized and adjusted and made myself smaller to accommodate her choices. I told her I needed to step out for a bit to clear my head. She waved me off like I was running an errand, told me to grab food on the way back because she had a long day and did not feel like cooking. While she sat on the couch scrolling her phone, probably texting the same person she blamed me for, I left and started making calls. Not emotional ones, administrative ones. The kind you make when you are dismantling a structure instead of arguing inside it.
The first call I made was to the leasing office for the apartment, not the apartment we shared occasionally, the one in my name, the one she parked her car under every night without thinking twice about who paid for that privilege. I confirmed the early termination clause, read through the penalties, and calculated the cost. Expensive, but clean. I authorized the payment immediately. The representative asked if I was sure, mentioned something about cooling off periods and how most people regret hasty decisions. I told her the decision was not hasty, it was overdue. The second call was to the storage facility, where I had been paying monthly fees for a unit that Lena used more than I did. Seasonal clothes, old furniture, boxes of things she claimed were sentimental but never looked at. I removed her access code, effective immediately. The manager confirmed the change would process within the hour. He did not ask why. Professionals understand that explanations are optional when the account holder makes a clear request. The third call was to my insurance provider. I removed her vehicle from my policy. It was her car, technically, but my insurance, my liability, my monthly payment. Separate car, separate problem. The agent asked if I wanted to transfer the policy to her name instead. I said no, just remove it entirely. Coverage would end at midnight. Clean separation, no overlap, no ambiguity. Each call took minutes, years of shared assumptions unraveled in less than an hour. What Lena had built her sense of security on was not our relationship, it was my infrastructure. And infrastructure can be decommissioned when the operational requirements change. I was not being vindictive, I was being precise. She had explained clearly that my contributions were the problem. I was simply solving the problem she identified. When I came back, I brought food like she asked. She barely looked up when I walked in. She was texting,
smiling, probably the same person she blamed me for pushing her toward. She had no idea that the clock had already started. She thanked me for the food without looking at me, mentioned something about her day, complained about a coworker. Normal conversation, comfortable conversation, the kind that happens when someone believes the foundation beneath them is permanent. She had no idea that by the time she went to bed that night, everything she thought was stable was already gone. The apartment access would terminate in 18 hours. The car insurance would lapse at midnight. The storage unit she assumed she could access whenever convenient was locked behind a code that no longer recognized her. She fell asleep easily, unburdened by consequence, still convinced that her confession had gone exactly as planned. I slept fine that night, not out of relief, out of clarity. Once someone tells you that their choices are your fault, the math becomes very simple. Responsibility without authority is just blame. I do not operate inside systems like that. I do not argue with people who have already decided I am the problem. I remove myself and let reality teach the lessons I no longer have the patience to explain. By morning, the lesson would begin.
The next morning, I left early, as usual. Lena was still asleep when I walked out. I did not wake her. There was no reason to announce anything yet. Deadlines matter more than speeches, and the deadlines I had set the night before were already in motion. Systems do not require emotional buy-in. They require instructions. I had given mine. At work, I handled my meetings like normal. Signed off on a vendor contract, reviewed a quarterly forecast, approved overtime for 2 supervisors. From the outside, nothing had changed. Internally, I was just executing a plan. The difference between chaos and control is documentation. I had documented everything the night before. Now I was simply watching the process unfold. Around noon, the leasing office called back to confirm the unit move-out timeline. Keys surrendered by end of day, parking access revoked immediately. I authorized everything, paid the balance in full, clean exit, no partial months, no prorated confusion. They emailed the confirmation within minutes. I forwarded it to a personal folder I had created that morning titled Done. That folder would grow throughout the day. At 2 in the afternoon, I got a notification from my insurance app confirming the vehicle removal. Coverage ended at 12:01 p.m., exactly as scheduled. That mattered. Liability matters. I was no longer financially responsible for a vehicle driven by someone who had just explained that consequences were negotiable as long as blame could be reassigned. The notification included a reference number. I saved that too. At 3, the storage facility emailed me confirmation that her access code had been disabled and her items would require my presence for retrieval going forward. Also important, I was not denying her access to her belongings. I was simply ensuring that access required coordination. Coordination requires communication. Communication requires acknowledgement that the relationship had fundamentally changed. She would understand that soon enough. I left work at my normal time. No rushing, no drama. When I pulled into the apartment complex, I noticed her car still there. Same spot. Same assumption that nothing could change without her consent. That assumption was about to be tested. She was on the couch when I walked in, immediately irritated. She asked why I had not texted all day, said communication mattered if we were going to fix things. I agreed again, calmly. I told her she needed to pack what she needed for the night. She laughed, asked if this was some boundary exercise her therapist would love. I handed her the leasing email on my phone. She read it twice, then a third time. Her face changed slowly, like the message was in a foreign language she was trying to translate. She asked what it meant. I told her it meant the apartment was gone, tonight. She stood up fast, asked where she was supposed to go. I told her that was no longer something I managed. That was when the panic started. Raised voice, accusations. She said I was overreacting, said people cheat all the time, said I could not do this without discussing it first. I reminded her that she already explained everything. My time and effort were the problem. I simply removed them. Her phone started vibrating while she argued, repeated alerts. She ignored them at first, too focused on trying to regain control of a conversation that had already ended. Then she looked down.
Parking enforcement notice. Towing scheduled. Uninsured vehicle flagged. The apartment complex had automated systems that cross-referenced parking permits with unit leases. When my lease terminated, her vehicle lost its authorization. Policy, not punishment. That was when she realized I was serious. Lena sat back down like her legs stopped working. She kept staring at her phone, refreshing the screen, hoping the messages would disappear if she looked long enough. They did not. She asked me if I was trying to scare her, said this was manipulative, said normal couples talk things through. I told her normal couples do not assign fault for cheating and then expect logistics to remain unchanged. She demanded I reverse it, said she would call the leasing office herself. I told her she could try, but the lease was already terminated and the payment processed. Final means final. That was when she tried a different angle. Tears. Not quiet ones, loud and sudden. She said she had nowhere to go, that her friends were busy, that I was abandoning her over one mistake. She reminded me of everything she had put up with, my hours, my stress, my absence. I let her finish. Then I reminded her that she framed the cheating as a consequence, not a mistake. Consequences have follow-through. This was mine. She asked about her car. I told her it was no longer insured under my name and could not stay in the garage. I suggested she move it immediately or arrange a tow herself. I was not paying fines for her convenience. She yelled that I was cruel, that I was punishing her instead of fixing things. I said fixing things requires trust, not blame shifting. By 8 in the evening, she was on the phone with her sister, pacing the living room, whisper yelling, repeating how unfair this was, how she did not see it coming. That part almost made me smile. She had seen it coming. She just assumed it would not apply to her. At 9, a tow truck pulled into the lot. She ran to the window. Panic replaced anger instantly. She grabbed her keys and ran downstairs barefoot. I stayed inside. From the balcony, I watched her argue with the driver. I watched her call someone else. I watched her realize nobody was coming fast enough. The car was gone within minutes. She came back upstairs shaking. Asked if she could stay one more night, said she would figure everything out in the morning. I told her no. I handed her a small bag I had packed earlier, essentials only, clothes, toiletries, nothing sentimental. I opened the door and waited. She stood there for a long time, looking at me like I was someone she no longer recognized. Then she stepped into the hallway. That was the last night she slept under a roof my time and effort paid for.
The next morning started with silence. No slammed doors, no angry texts waiting on my phone when I woke up. Just notifications from systems doing exactly what they were designed to do when instructions are clear. At 7 in the morning, I received confirmation that the apartment access codes had been fully disabled. At 7:12, the building sent a notice that the unit would be inspected later that afternoon. At 7:30, my bank app confirmed the final lease payment had cleared. Everything was closed. Nothing pending. Lena texted me at 8:04. Just one message. Where am I supposed to go now? I did not reply. The question assumed I was still responsible for solving problems she created. I was not. At 9:10 she called. I declined it. At 9:12 she called again, then again. I muted the threat. Emergencies get answered. Guilt does not. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a different number. Her friend Maya. I knew her. Loud opinions. Always told Lena she deserved better. Always had advice when things were good and panic when things were real. She told me Lena was spiraling, that she had no car, that she was couch surfing, that I was being extreme. She said people make mistakes and relationships are about forgiveness. I told her forgiveness does not require continued access to assets. Then I ended the call. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was officially vacated. The leasing office sent photos. Empty rooms, clean counters, no trace of her except a faint outline where furniture had been. It looked exactly how it had before she moved in. That symmetry felt intentional. At 4 in the afternoon, Lena finally sent a longer message. Paragraphs. Apologies mixed with blame. She said she did not mean it like that she only cheated once, that she never thought I would actually leave. That was the line that mattered. She never thought I would actually leave. That told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed me, not as a partner, as infrastructure.
I replied once. You said my time and effort pushed you to cheat. I removed them. This is the result. She responded instantly. Panic again. Said she would do anything. Therapy, boundaries, transparency, whatever I wanted. What I wanted already existed. It was called peace. Less than 24 hours after telling me the cheating was my fault, she no longer had an apartment, a car, or a financial safety net tied to my name, and she still thought this was a phase. It was not. By the second morning, the messages changed tone again. Less apology, more bargaining. She started suggesting compromises like they were reasonable. Temporary separation, shared therapy sessions, staying friends until things cooled down. She even suggested we keep things quiet so people would not get the wrong idea. That was the moment I knew blocking her was necessary, not for drama, for containment. When someone believes access to you is negotiable, they will keep negotiating forever. By the second morning, the messages changed tone again. Less apology, more bargaining. She started suggesting compromises like they were reasonable. Temporary separation, shared therapy sessions, staying friends until things cooled down. She even suggested we keep things quiet so people would not get the wrong idea. That was the moment I knew blocking her was necessary, not for drama, for containment. When someone believes access to you is negotiable, they will keep negotiating forever. They will use emotion, they will use urgency, they will use history, they will use guilt. The only way to end it cleanly is to remove the channel entirely. I waited until my lunch break. Calm moment, no adrenaline, no anger, just execution. First, I saved the messages that mattered, not to reread, but to remember why this decision was correct if doubt ever tried to sneak in later. Facts beat nostalgia every time. Then, I blocked her number. I blocked her email. I blocked her on every social platform we shared. I removed her from cloud access. Shared calendars, gone. Location sharing, off. Emergency contact, replaced. All of it. The silence afterward was immediate and total. No typing bubbles, no incoming calls from unknown numbers, no frantic follow-ups slipping through cracks, just quiet. That quiet felt heavier than anger ever did. Not empty, settled. About an hour later, I got a message request from someone else, her sister. Short and sharp, asking why I was ignoring Lena, saying she was panicking, saying I owed her a conversation. I blocked that too. I am not responsible for managing someone else's consequences, especially when they clearly explained their reasoning and expected me to accept it without response. That evening, I went home and cooked dinner. Simple meal. Ate at the table instead of the couch. Cleaned up afterward. Normal things. Grounding things. For the first time in a long while, my apartment felt like my space again. Not a shared negotiation zone, not a place where I had to explain why I was tired. Just quiet structure and control. Blocking her was not the end. It was the seal. What followed was not chaos. It was clarity. The noise did not stop immediately, but it redirected. By the next morning, I had 3 emails from unknown addresses. Different names, same tone. Confused, emotional, long explanations about misunderstanding and growth and how people deserve grace. I did not open them. I deleted them and tightened my filters. Then the indirect pressure started. A coworker asked if I was okay because someone had commented on one of my old posts asking if I was heartless. A mutual friend texted saying Lena was telling people I abandoned her without warning, that I knew she was struggling and chose work over compassion. The narrative shifted fast. That part did not surprise me. People who refuse accountability always rush to control the story, especially when they lose access to the person they were blaming. I sent one message to the group chat we shared with friends. Short, neutral, final. Lena and I are no longer together. Please do not involve me in messages on her behalf. Then I left the chat. By that evening, the calls started coming to my office line. She had looked it up. That crossed the line. Work was not a negotiation space. I forwarded the number to IT and asked for it to be blocked from external access. They did it without questions. Professionals understand boundaries. That night, I sat down and reviewed my routines, not out of paranoia, out of discipline. Changed passwords, updated security questions, confirmed there were no shared subscriptions left, removed her name from emergency access lists. Quiet work, necessary work. Around midnight, my building concierge emailed me. Someone had tried to access the garage, claiming there had been a mistake, claimed she lived there. The attempt was denied. Policy followed. Incident logged. That was the moment the situation stopped being emotional and became procedural. I replied, thanking them and asking for the footage to be saved just in case. The next morning, nothing happened. No messages, no calls, no third-party guilt. Just a normal day where my attention belonged to my own life again. It occurred to me then that this was probably the first time Lena had ever been fully cut off from something she felt entitled to. Not just me. Stability, access, resources, attention. People like that do not collapse loudly. They spiral quietly at first, and I was no longer anywhere near the center of it. 2 days passed without contact. That was when the consequences started surfacing outside of me. A friend from Lena's circle reached out, not to argue but to ask questions, practical ones. Where her car was, why her insurance lapsed, why the apartment complex would not let her retrieve things without approval. The tone was different now, less moral outrage, more confusion. I answered exactly once, brief, factual, no emotion. She no longer has access to assets in my name. That answer traveled faster than I expected. By that afternoon, the narrative shifted again, less villain framing, more shock. People realized this was not a dramatic breakup with slammed doors and screaming matches. This was infrastructure being removed, quietly, legally, completely. Lena tried one more angle. She showed up at my building, not my apartment, the lobby. The concierge recognized her immediately from the incident log and denied access. She asked them to call me. They did not. They followed policy and asked her to leave. She sat outside for nearly an hour. I watched from my window, not hidden, not gloating, just observing a situation I was no longer part of. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, structurally, like someone who had always leaned on systems she never built and suddenly found herself unsupported. Eventually, she left. That night, I received a notification from my bank about a failed charge, a subscription I had forgotten to cancel that she had tried to use. Declined. Account closed. Another door she assumed would open that did not. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just confirmation. When someone tells you that your effort caused their betrayal, they are telling you they believe you are obligated to stay no matter what they do.
The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run. First one in months. The city was quiet. My phone stayed in my pocket the entire time. I realized something mid-stride. This was the first week in years where my time belonged fully to me, and I was not giving it back. By the end of the week, the situation reached a phase where other people started connecting dots without my involvement. One of Lena's coworkers reached out to someone I work with, not to accuse, to ask if everything was okay because Lena had been missing work and showing up late when she did come in. Apparently, she had been borrowing rides. Apparently, she had been sleeping on different couches. Apparently, the story she had been telling did not line up with reality anymore. When resources disappear, patterns become visible. She attempted to retrieve her remaining belongings from the storage unit on Friday. The manager called me like they were instructed to. I approved a supervised pickup window. 30 minutes, one time. Inventory logged, no access afterward. She did not show. Instead, I received a message from an unknown number claiming to be her friend, saying Lena was overwhelmed and this was all moving too fast. That phrase stood out to me. Too fast. Nothing about this was fast. It was simply decisive. Later that day, I found out why she did not show up. Her car was still impounded. The fees had stacked. Registration expired. No insurance meant no release without proof. Proof she did not have. Systems do not care about intent. They care about compliance. That evening, I finally told my parents what had happened. Not the emotional version, the factual one. They listened quietly. My father nodded once and said, "You handled it clean." My mother asked if I was eating enough. That was it. The next morning, I ran into a mutual acquaintance at the grocery store. They looked uncomfortable, said they heard Lena was having a rough time. I said I was sorry to hear that and changed aisles. I was not being cold, I was being consistent. By Sunday night, the noise had faded almost completely. No new messages, no indirect pressure, no attempts at access. Just distance.
People eventually stop pushing when they realize there is nothing left to extract. I sat on my couch that night and reviewed the last 7 days. No shouting, no insults, no revenge. Just removal. Systematic, complete, final. The apartment was gone. The car was impounded. The storage was locked. The communication was blocked. The financial ties were severed. The social connections were dissolved. Everything that connected us had been dismantled with the same precision I used to build logistics networks at work. There was only one thing left to do: close the last door. Not the physical ones, those were already locked. The administrative one. The final piece that would ensure no loose ends remained to invite future complications or second-guessing.
The last door was not physical. It was administrative. On Monday morning, I finalized one remaining change. I updated my beneficiary information. Not because I expected anything to happen, but because loose ends invite future problems. Old assumptions do not belong in new systems. Insurance policies, retirement accounts, investment portfolios. Every place where her name appeared as a secondary contact or emergency beneficiary, I replaced it. The process was simple. A few phone calls, a few digital forms, a few confirmations sent to my email. Within 2 hours, every financial and legal document that had once listed Lena as connected to my life now listed someone else or no one at all. Clean slate. Then I archived the folder labeled Done. That was it. I did not send a final message. I did not announce closure. I did not wait for acknowledgement. Closure is not something you request from the person who broke trust. It is something you execute when the conditions are clear. Later that week, I heard through someone else that Lena had finally retrieved her car. Borrowed money, paid the fees, got it released from impound. The apartment was gone. The routines were gone. The safety net she assumed would always be there had proved conditional after all. She told people she never thought I would actually pull everything away, that she assumed we would argue and then settle back into normal, that she thought my long hours meant I needed her more than she needed me. That misunderstanding cost her everything she had access to. As for me, my schedule stayed full, but it felt different, not heavier, cleaner. When I stayed late at work, it was my choice again. When I went home, it was to a space that did not question why I was tired or ask me to apologize for being consistent. I did not win anything. I reclaimed it. People sometimes ask if I regret not talking it out. I do not. She already explained her reasoning clearly. She said my effort caused her betrayal. I accepted that premise and removed the effort. That is not revenge. That is alignment. If someone believes you are obligated to stay regardless of how they treat you, the most educational response is to leave calmly and permanently. I have not heard from her since, and I do not expect to. Some lessons only land when the support holding them up is gone. The infrastructure she relied on was not the relationship. It was my willingness to be blamed for her choices. Once that willingness disappeared, so did everything built on top of it. The narrative she tried to control eventually faded. People moved on to other drama. Mutual friends stopped asking questions. Her social media went quiet for a while, then resumed with posts about growth and healing and finding herself. I did not follow any of it. I was not interested in the performance. What mattered was that my life returned to a state of order, predictable, structured, mine. I worked my hours without guilt. I planned my future without negotiation. I built what I wanted to build without someone reframing my discipline as neglect.
Weeks passed, then months. The absence of chaos became the new normal. I stopped checking my blocked messages folder. I stopped wondering if she would show up somewhere unexpected. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no other shoe. The situation was resolved because I had resolved it, not through argument or reconciliation, but through removal. At work, I was promoted again. Larger team, bigger budget, more responsibility. The kind of advancement that happens when your focus is undivided and your energy is not being drained by someone who views your contributions as obligations. My colleagues noticed the change. Not in my work, that had always been solid, but in my presence. I was lighter, more engaged, less distracted. One of my supervisors asked if I had been on vacation. I told him no, just cleaned up some personal matters. He nodded and said whatever I had done was working. Keep doing it. I intended to. I started running regularly, not for weight loss or fitness goals, but for the simple pleasure of uninterrupted time. No phone calls, no guilt, no one waiting at home ready to list everything I had done wrong by choosing to invest in myself. I took a weekend trip to the mountains, solo, something I had not done in years. Lena had always wanted to come along, then complained the entire time about the lack of cell service or the uncomfortable accommodations. Alone, the discomfort was just part of the experience. I hiked, I read, I sat by a fire and thought about nothing in particular. It was perfect. I also started saying no, not defensively, just clearly. When someone asked for my time or resources or emotional labor, I evaluated whether it aligned with what I wanted. If it did not, I declined. No long explanations, no apologies, just no. The clarity that came from removing Lena extended into every other area of my life. Friends who expected me to always be available learned I had boundaries. Family who assumed I would handle every logistical problem learned to solve their own. Coworkers who thought I would cover their mistakes learned I would not. The pattern was consistent. I stopped operating as infrastructure for other people's convenience. The interesting thing about boundaries is that they reveal who respects you and who resents you. Some people adjusted immediately. They appreciated the clarity. They worked with the structure instead of against it. Others disappeared. They needed someone without limits, and I was no longer that person. I did not mourn those losses. I documented them. By the time 6 months had passed, my life looked completely different. Same job, same city, same apartment complex, but the internal structure had fundamentally changed. I was no longer building a future that included someone who viewed my effort as the problem. I was building a future that rewarded my effort with results I could measure and enjoy. I updated my long-term plans, 5-year goals, 10-year goals, financial milestones, career targets. None of them included compromises for someone else's convenience. That did not make me selfish, it made me clear. And clarity, I had learned, was worth more than any relationship built on blame. I have not heard from Lena since, and I do not expect to. Some lessons only land when the support holding them up is gone. The infrastructure she relied on was not the relationship. It was my willingness to be blamed for her choices. Once that willingness disappeared, so did everything built on top of it. The narrative she tried to control eventually faded. People moved on to other drama. Mutual friends stopped asking questions. Her social media went quiet for a while, then resumed with posts about growth and healing and finding herself. I did not follow any of it. I was not interested in the performance. What mattered was that my life returned to a state of order, predictable, structured, mine. I worked my hours without guilt. I planned my future without negotiation. I built what I wanted to build without someone reframing my discipline as neglect. The question people ask most often is whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have fought harder or communicated better or given her another chance. The answer is always the same: no. She communicated perfectly. She told me clearly that my time and effort pushed her to cheat. She told me it was my fault. She gave me all the information I needed to make a decision. I made it. Fighting would have meant accepting the premise that her choices were my responsibility. They were not. Communicating more would have meant believing that someone who blamed me for their betrayal would suddenly develop accountability through conversation. They would not. Giving her another chance would have meant teaching her that consequences are negotiable as long as she could frame herself as the victim. I do not teach lessons I do not want people to learn. What I did instead was remove myself from a system that required me to be wrong so she could be blameless. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. People romanticize forgiveness as if it requires continued proximity to the person who harmed you. It does not. You can forgive someone and still remove every access point they have to your life. You can wish them well and still refuse to fund their stability. You can acknowledge their humanity and still decline to be their infrastructure. I do not hate Lena. I do not think about her enough to sustain hate. I simply recognize that her view of me was incompatible with my view of myself, and I chose my view. The most important thing I learned from the entire experience is this. When someone tells you who they are and what they believe you owe them, listen. Then decide if you agree. If you do not agree, leave. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just leave. Remove your time, your resources, your attention, your presence. Let the absence teach what your presence never could. Some people will call that cold. They are wrong. It is precise. It is the same precision I use at work when a vendor fails to deliver or a contract becomes unfavorable. You do not argue endlessly. You do not beg for change. You assess, you decide, you execute. Personal relationships deserve the same respect for clarity that professional ones demand. Lena wanted someone to blame. I gave her exactly what she asked for, a life without my time and effort. She just did not realize that removing those things would remove everything else she had built on top of them. That is not my failure. That is hers. And I am no longer in the business of managing other people's failures.